Good evening, everybody. My name is Rachel Moriarty. I'm the Director of Operations at the Schumacher Center for New Economics, tonight's sponsor. On behalf of the Schumacher Center and all of our co-sponsors tonight, I'd like to welcome you to the space. And I'd like to start by thanking tonight's sponsors, and there are many of them, so hold on. Berkshires Inc., Berkshire Agricultural Ventures, Berkshire Columbia Investment Network, Berkshire Community Land Trust, Berkshire Co-op Market, Berkshire Grown, Berkshire Waldorf High School, Community Development Corporation of South Berkshire, Community Land Trust in the Southern Berkshires, Egremont Agricultural Commission, Egremont Land Trust, the Good Work Institute, Great Barrington Land Conservancy, Green Acres, Hawthorne Valley Association, Multicultural Bridge, the Marin Institute, the Nutrition Center, and Orion Magazine. Just a few weeks ago, many of these organizations helped to convene a conversation around fostering resilient regional economies in the Berkshires at an event with the Executive Director of the Center for an Agricultural Economy, Sarah Waring, and the President of Sterling College, Matthew Durr. In a talk called Growing an Agricultural Economy, they described the collaboration among multiple agricultural enterprises in the Vermont Northeast Kingdom and the efforts to build a regenerative economy there. Tonight's talk is a continuation of that event. And you might be wondering what the connection is. What does an environmental liberal arts college in Vermont have to do with an agricultural advocacy organization in Kentucky? Well, the Berry Center has joined forces with Sterling College to provide the next generation of farmers with the homecoming curriculum for which Mary's father, uncle, grandfather, and friend Wes Jackson have always advocated. Through the Berry Farming Program, students from generational farm families, rural communities, and urban agrarians from Kentucky and all around the nation will be given an education in place-based agrarian thought and practice. But I'll let Mary tell you more about that. Mary herself is an 8th-generation Henry County Kentuckian, a well-known advocate for the preservation of rural culture and agriculture. She is currently working to reconnect cities with landscapes around them. For 32 years, she farmed for a living, first as a dairy farmer, then raising tobacco, and then later raising organic vegetables as well as pastured poultry and beef. In 2011, she founded the Berry Center, which advocates for small farmers, land conservation, and healthy regional economies by focusing on land use, farm policy, farmer education, urban education about farming, and local food infrastructure. Its goal is to establish within the Commonwealth of Kentucky a national model of urban-rural connectedness. Mary serves on the board of directors of United Citizens Bank in Newcastle, Kentucky, and we are proud to have her on the board of directors of the Schumacher Center for New Economics. In 2016, she charmed us with her wit as she moderated a conversation between her father, Wendell Berry, and Wes Jackson at the 36th annual E.F. Schumacher Lectures. And we are very pleased to have you back here tonight, Mary. So please come on up.
Well, I'm happy to know that I charmed anybody with my wit, because I'm not sure I said 3 words that evening. Be quiet, Wes. I think that was it. But anyway, well, I'm delighted to be here. You all live in a beautiful place. I want to thank my friends at Schumacher for introducing me to the Berkshires. I'd not been here until I came to my first board meeting, Susan, about 5 years ago. So thank you to Susan and Amelia, Rachel, my friend Ann McDonald, who serves on the board of directors with me, picked me up at the airport, and she's taking good care of me. And I want to tell you how much this area has lived in our imagination for, many, many years. My father and mother are good friends of Susan's. They were friends of Bob Swan's. My husband, Steve Smith, started the first CSA in Kentucky. And he called a woman named Robin Van Ian. Am I saying that right, correctly? He read about her somewhere and called her up and talked to her about community-supported agriculture. And from that call, he started a CSA farm. Daddy has always been really interested and encouraged by the work of Berkshires. In fact, has tried seriously to do something like that in Kentucky. I will have to say that at this point, we have so little to spend money on in Henry County, Kentucky. We've got to do some building back before something like a local currency would work, I think. But I want to thank you all for the example you've been to my family and to people I love in Henry County. I was reading through what I have to say this evening before I came, and I thought, man, I am so boring. I say the same things all the time. And I remember, I know what my mother says about my father's writing, and I've written it down. My mother says that my father's principal asset as a writer has been the knack of repeating himself. So I take some solace in that I'm going to be repeating myself, and some things you just can't say enough. I also wrote something else down yesterday, just as sort of it sort of sums up the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing and everything that I think, well, not everything, but a lot of what's on my mind, and I think what's on the people at Schumacher's minds, and a lot of good people around the country. Every town in my small county is now either dead or dying. This dying, of course, is involved in the dying of rural communities. But the dying of rural communities is preceded by the death in agriculture of the cultures of husbandry, the result of being eroded in toxic grain fields, plundered woodlands, and polluted rivers. It is rural America, the actual land and the actual people of our country, that is dying. Obsession with the future and with visions of the future are no help at all, but only make things worse. What politicians, economists, journalists, public intellectuals, and other enlightened ones need to do is look at, learn about, and understand what is going on right here, right now in rural America. My talk is to suggest some ways that we might go about this work of settling America in the only way I think it is possible. By doing the work in our own places that is right in front of us to do. In 2012, the Barry Center had a conference to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the publication of The Unsettling of America, a book my father wrote and published in '77. Does that add up correctly? We called it From Unsettling to Resettling. What will it take to resettle America? About 15 minutes after the programs were delivered from the printer, I realized my mistake. We have never settled America. We have colonized it. I will use the work of the Barry Center to make the case for local work, not because I think I have a greater understanding of the answers than anyone else, but because I know so little. Really, a good deal of time was spent every day trying to come up with the right questions to begin to, as my father would say, solve for pattern. I'd say the first few years of the Barry Center were spent that way. Once you can get to a list of questions, then the work can start. When my father in West Jackson decided a few years ago, well now many years ago I'd say, to celebrate ignorance at a gathering in Matfield Green, Kansas, I was greatly comforted by the event. I am much more comfortable in a room with other people trying to figure things out than a room filled with experts. I do feel able to speak to the problems of rural Kentucky and other rural places by virtue of my love for my own place and a lifetime of farming, both entrepreneurially and within a federal program, and a family history of passionate farmers and passionate advocates for farmers and farmland. And I know, like my friends at the Schumacher Center for New Economics, I will live with the consequences of my work for the rest of my life. My home is in farm country in north central Kentucky. I have lived and farmed there all of my life, first by birth and then by choice. My great-grandfather said after the first and only trip he ever took in his life, "I didn't see anything I liked better than the field behind my barn." I am his true heir. While I'm grateful for the traveling I have done and the places I have seen, nothing has tempted me away from the beautiful, maybe unremarkable, but now threatened landscape of my home country. Even now, when this country so familiar to me is also strange to me, it remains the only place I want to live. I know that it is strange to my husband, a lifelong farmer and a descendant of generations of farmers. I know from my father's writing and my daily conversations with both my parents that they feel the strangeness of it every day, but there we stay. And so I have been a member of the same community all of my life, where my family has lived and farmed for 8 generations before me. I came easily to the idea of the membership, as my father calls it, because of my work, often done quite reluctantly when I was young, in the tobacco fields on neighbors' farms, in hay fields, and the work that went on every day on Lane's Landing Farm, where I grew up and where my parents live now. What my parents wanted my brother and me to notice, they told us to notice, and not just once, and they haven't quit. I managed, often in spite of myself, to grow up under the tutelage of men and women who lived by farming and who were passionately interested in the work of their places every day. I have always known myself to be one of the lucky ones. I come from a long line of people who've been able to follow a calling to farm. It was this knowledge some years ago that led me to start the Berry Center. When I wanted to come home after school, there was something to come home to. My father says in The Unsettling of America, quote, "A culture is not a collection of relics or ornaments, but a practical necessity, and its corruption invokes calamity. A healthy culture is a communal order of memory, insight, value, work, conviviality, reverence, and aspiration. It reveals the human necessities and the human limits. It clarifies our inescapable bonds to the earth and to each other. It assures that the necessary work is done and that it is done well. A healthy farm culture can be based only upon familiarity and can grow only among a people soundly established upon the land. It nourishes and safeguards a human intelligence of the earth that no amount of technology can replace. The growth of such a culture was once a strong possibility in the farm communities of this country. We now have only the sad remnants of those communities. If we allow another generation to pass without doing what is necessary to enhance and embolden the possibility now perishing with them, we will lose it altogether," unquote. That was published 41 years ago, and we have lost 2 more generations of farming people. The children and grandchildren of farmers are now working in power plants up and down the Ohio River, and these are the economic winners. Many of these men and women are still farming. They are working full-time off the farm for the right to farm, and so the membership has changed. Some of the young farmers we work with are mad as hell, and mad at the wrong people. I expect most of them voted for Trump in our once solidly democratic state. The membership is fractured because of unrelenting economic stress. My father heard a farmer say in a meeting recently about agricultural runoff in the waterways in Kentucky, "It is hard to make the right decision on your farm when you are wondering who will be the next person to live in your house." Good work as membership is just one way to speak of a wholeness that I believe human beings long for. It must involve working in harmony with nature and with one another. How to work toward this in a land-destroying, people-destroying economy is our great challenge. Farmland and farming communities all over this country are in decline or have been swallowed up by our industrial economy. In that, we are tragically the same as other rural places all over the United States, and I suppose our world. A difference in our area is that our decline in my part of Kentucky can be directly tied to the loss of the Burley Tobacco Program. The program ended in 2004, which gives us 14 years to see what happens to a farm culture when its economy is removed. The Burley Tobacco Program defended a crop that turned out to be indefensible, and so I believe the program and its principles have been quickly forgotten. It was the only farm program, a price support, never a subsidy, that served the people it was supposed to serve, the small family farmers. Because it limited production of a high-value crop, it protected farmers and farms from overproduction and encouraged a highly diversified farm economy from 1941 until the program ended. For a while, we had a fairly stable farm population that supported the little towns in our country. We had a farm culture of shared work. Differences in political and social issues didn't matter much when our economy was stable, but now matter absolutely. The community is polarized because we have lost our shared culture. In spite of 40 years or so of a local food movement and our close proximity to urban markets, we are losing farms and farmers at a terrifying rate. I was recently asked to write a foreword to a book first published in 1990 and just reissued, so that year has been on my mind a good deal lately. My youngest child, Tanya, was born in February of that year, and my grandfather, John Berry Sr., turned 90 the following November. He would die at 91. My grandfather was a lawyer and a farmer who served land-conserving communities all his life. He was the principal author of the Burley Tobacco Program. My daughter was born onto a farm and into a way of life that would not have existed without the work of her great-grandfather. In the 28 years since her birth, that way of life has virtually disappeared. And maybe most importantly, in relation to our work at the Berry Center, my husband, Steve Smith, started the first CSA in Kentucky in 1990. We then thought it an historical event that would begin the change we needed. His accounting, shared publicly, proved that a farmer could make more per acre by raising vegetables than could be made on tobacco. He and I talk often of our attempts to keep farming without tobacco, which we did successfully. However, we believed all those years ago that our entrepreneurial work was to keep making farm payments while we, naively it turned out, believed that there would be a local food system that farmers would soon join. Our other mistake, it has turned out, was to believe that local farmers were essential to a local food movement. My father says that his father did the important work, and he and his brother John Berry Jr. just took it up. My brother Den and I have now taken it up at the Berry Center. That work was and is to put a sustaining economy under good farming. We are working to ask and answer what seem to me to be the most important questions of our time. How can farmers afford to farm well? How do we become a culture that will support good farming? I believe that it was the realization that after 40 years of a local food movement and much work done by my family and others to move farmers past dependence on tobacco, and the fact that I could point to almost no good result in the well-watered, fertile land of my home, led me to start the Berry Center. Henry County, Kentucky is 40 miles northeast of Louisville, a city said to have 5 times the demand for local food than there is supply. I went to my father with my concerns. We're going backwards, I said. We've got to work on protecting farmers in the marketplace, education for new farmers and for existing farmers. The Burley program needs to be studied, not forgotten, and so on. And maybe most importantly, we need to work on these things from an agrarian, from a farming point of view. He said, "It sounds like you're starting a center. Do it." Well, I wasn't thinking about starting a center, actually. I actually thought he should probably get busy and do more. But anyway, so I have started a center. Agrarian thought must be institutionalized, and to do so, we must work on the culture of agriculture. Besides the things that pop up almost daily that we deal with at the center, the latest being a couple of our few remaining small dairy farms losing their contracts with Dean Foods, our 4 main programs will give you an idea of how we're working in Kentucky. The first is the Wendellberry Farming Program, and maybe some of you heard Matthew Durr when he was here, a couple of weeks ago? Somebody can yell out, we've already heard that if you feel so moved. We must have more farmers. We must have more farmers who understand how to build the soil. It will be more difficult to build a population of good farmers than it has been to get rid of them. We have lost much of the local culture that passes knowledge and land from one generation to another. We need to educate young and not so young farmers, but how should this be done? With only 16% of us living in rural places, and of that percentage, less than 0.75% actually farming, it is imperative that we educate these students to go home to farm, or dig in, make a home, and take up farming somewhere else. The urgent need for farmers is clear if the problems of conventional agriculture are acknowledged, and if the local food movement is to become a cultural change, the kind of change that stabilizes rural communities, builds soil, stops soil erosion, and deals correctly with climate change, food instability, and the iniquities of our current food system, the kind of change needed to stabilize urban communities as well. After founding the Berry Center in 2011, the first project that we took up was the Berry Farming Program. We worked with Dr. Leah Bayans to design an interdisciplinary ecological agriculture curriculum. We followed the lead of elders that we knew and trusted and established a program based on the life work of my father, and his brother. For 50 years, Daddy has been speaking nationally and internationally for land use that takes into consideration the land and the people. We heeded his call to upend the typical upward mobility major and established a major in homecoming, which rather than leading students up and away, brings them down to earth and back to their homes. In the fall of 2013, after much searching for the right place to start, we launched the pilot program at St. Catherine College, a school established by the Dominican Sisters of Peace in Springfield, Kentucky in 1931. The first cohort of students enrolled in the Berry Farming Program graduated in 2016. They participated in dozens of agricultural conferences. This is my name-dropping sentence. You'll have to excuse me. They spent countless hours serving communities, and they had meaningful encounters with Wes Jackson, Vandana Shiva, and the Prince of Wales. Are you all impressed? I thought about taking it out, and I found that I just couldn't. They did pragmatic research in sustainable agriculture and had internships on farms in Kentucky, Australia, India, and Tanzania. We had students from India and Tanzania. Most dear to my heart is that we were getting generational farm kids from what is left of the farm culture in Kentucky, and not just encouraging their passion for farming, but giving them the information needed to farm well. The program linked agroecology with agrarian history, environmental literature, gender studies, fine arts, and business. These areas were blended so that a student farmer learned to make decisions informed by literary representations of the land, and a student concentrating on environmental writing had learned something about farming. The students learned that the devastation suffered by rural America is not inevitable. It is not the result of changing times or technological development. It is not the result of uncontrollable economic circumstances. It is a crisis by design. This is empowering information for young people from rural Kentucky to rural India. The upward mobility major has put our schools far too much at the service of what we have been calling overconfidently our economy. Education has increasingly been reduced to job training, preparing young people not for responsible adulthood and citizenship, but for expert servitude to the corporations. There has been an ongoing feeble objection to this reduction, but most people have been willing to ignore or tolerate it, or even applaud it, despite the obvious dangers. Now, however, the failure of the economy and its subservient institutions has become too obvious to be denied. We are now facing a hardship long deferred. We have no choice but to do better. My father said that the Berry Farming Program curriculum should be in every college and university. We need everyone, not just the few remaining farmers, to be agrarians. Now for the bad news. After an excellent start at St. Catherine and the graduation of our first students, the college took bankruptcy and closed July 2016. A heartbreaking occurrence of the students, faculty, staff, and community of St. Catherine. Dr. Leah Bayans, the director of the program, came to work at the Berry Center as a staff person to work with my father and me on the curriculum while we looked for our next partner. We are now working, as you know, with Sterling College in Vermont to establish what is now called the Wendell Berry Farming Program in Newcastle, Kentucky. I thought we could get away with that because I knew he wouldn't Google it. But he found out and he has chosen to forgive me. The Wendell Berry Farming Program in Newcastle, Kentucky, the county seat of Henry County and the home of the Berry Center. The first students are expected in Newcastle in August of this year. This is from the case statement for the program. Published in 1977, Wendell Berry's seminal work, The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture, describes the peril facing rural communities and farming. In its pages, he pointed to the miseducation of farmers in industrial agriculture as a critical problem. Now, 41 years later, we live in a very unsettled America with desecrated land, a threatened climate, aging farmers, and a crisis in our rural communities. The Berry Center advocates for farmers, land-conserving communities, and healthy local economies. Sterling College, an accredited liberal arts college inspired by my father and others, pioneered teaching sustainable agriculture. These two organizations are collaborating to establish an educational model that prepares a new generation of farmers to help reinvigorate rural America. The Wendell Berry Farming Program draws from Sterling's success, contributing to the rural agricultural movement in northern Vermont. With the expertise and resources of the Berry Center, we will create another site in Henry County, Kentucky that prepares a new generation of farmers that we hope to then use to promote the adoption of this model across the country. The three essential elements of our plan are a new concept of farmer education. Students will enroll in the third and fourth years of college having discerned that they want a rigorous, experiential, place-based agricultural education informed by the writing of Wendell Berry and other agrarians, and that they aspire to live in and strengthen rural communities. The program will enroll 50 students who will earn a degree in sustainable agriculture. The cost of education and student loan debt impact the choices those who plan to farm make and are challenges we will address. Sterling is a work college through which students contribute labor to cover much of the cost of room and board. The income earned from the Wendell Berry Farming Program endowment will cover the cost of tuition. And we're working to raise a working endowment. We understand the barriers farmers face and cannot leave the outcome to chance. Our endowment will work for our graduates by supporting the transition between study and the implementation of the whole farm plan they complete as part of the program. The endowment will secure lifelong access to expertise and low-interest loans to graduates. When the first students come to us in August, they will take a course called Homecoming 1, Good Work is Membership. This is the first course in a year-long curricular sequence. It introduces students to the farm program, the Berry Center, and its home place, Henry County, Kentucky. Students gain insight into the natural and cultural history of the area by exploring how good work leads to membership in place, or as Daddy puts it, how people are joined to the land by work. Our second program is called Home Place Meet and is a present-day iteration of the Producers Program, which is what the Burley Tobacco Program was called and indeed it was. I will talk about the program in more detail in a minute. As I said, I only have one subject. The program, a federal program, can't be replicated at this point in our history, but it can be used as a model to protect farmers in the marketplace by carefully matching supply and demand to maintain parity pricing. Cheap food policies, out-of-control production, and the false belief that there are too many farmers have driven farmers off farms for decades. We can have a better agriculture if we decide to value the people who understand land use. We accept Wes Jackson's idea of a correct eyes to acres ratio. Farmers must not live in a constant economic emergency. That would be the change that changes agriculture. If food is a cultural product, and we believe that it is, then we believe that there is strength in beginning where our farm culture in Kentucky is. Kentucky has more beef cattle than any state east of the Mississippi River. Cattle farming is the best farming left in our state. Our rolling landscape lends itself to the perennial agriculture of pastures and forage crops. However, we don't finish beef here, which means getting them to slaughter weight. But instead, send our cattle to distant feedlots at weaning weight. Our local processing facility in Henry County has been unable to fill an order from a local distributor for one finished beef a week. Our cattle are well raised until weaning weight. I often think of Will Harris, a farmer from Georgia. Maybe some of you know who he is. I heard him say once that sending your cattle to feedlots is like raising your daughter to be a princess and then sending her to live in a whorehouse. So however you feel about that, you can call Will Harris and tell him. We're establishing a cooperative called Home Place Meat. We have been marketing roast beef for a year and are pleased with the response from the demand side and from the supply side. We are processing at around 600 pounds before the calves are weaned. This allows farmers to join our program without changing much of anything, and they don't have to spend any money. The calves are raised on the cow on perennial pastures, no grains fed, and are ash-free, antibiotic, steroid, and hormone-free. We are on schedule to introduce 2 more lines, a grass-finished product and a non-GMO grain-finished product. We will add pork and lamb as time goes on. And I want to say one thing about, people talk a lot about grass-finished beef, grass-finished, animals finished on grass, so they have no grain. You all probably are familiar with all of this, probably more than my normal audience. In our area, to get a cow to weaning, to slaughter weight, which is around 1,500 pounds, 1,200 to 1,500 pounds, you have to keep that calf an extra year. And there has been no incentive to do that. They're not going to make more money, and so they're just taking more risk on. So we're trying to change that, that whole system. And so far, so good. The meat is wonderful. We believe that if mechanisms are put into place to move local products, if farm production is kept in line with demand and farm prices are fair, the rural economy can heal itself. Our third program is the Agrarian Culture Center and Bookstore. We are working in our own home place to gather a people together who lost their community when the farm economy was lost. A community once united over generations is now divided. Next door to the Berry Center, housed in a log cabin built in 1790, is our bookstore. The bookstore carries all of my father's books. The rest of the collection is inspired by my parents' home library and features works that have influenced them, titles by friends and mentors, and books for young people that have been beloved by many generations of my family, and some they've never heard of. The Culture Center is the birthplace of a rural reading program, the Agrarian Literary League. Established in 2016, the program is bringing humanities programming to rural communities, fostering the preservation of local histories through conversation and storytelling, strengthening pride and stewardship of place, and conserving the unique culture found in rural places. And it is working. No one is more surprised than I am. The first book chosen for the reading program was a novel called The Memory of Old Jack. Local money was raised so that anyone from our county who wanted a book could have a free copy. 300 people got books. 20 book groups were started. And I heard from people I've known all of my life that this was the first book they had ever read, and now they're hungry for more. And these programs have life. These groups are still meeting to talk about shared history and getting ready for this year's program. The archive at the Berry Center is the foundational work of the center. My grandfather, John M. Berry Sr., a lawyer and farmer, devoted his life to advocating for small farmers in their communities. John M. Berry Sr. was one of the principal authors of the Burley Tobacco Producers Program, a federal program that offered the farmers essential protections in the marketplace for over 80 years. He also served as the president of the Burley Tobacco Growers Cooperative, the entity that managed the program for many of those years. He served as a protector of the program until he was 85 years old, always ready to go to D.C. to defend the program and the people the program served. John Sr. was a meticulous record keeper. The files from his law office and the cooperative offer an invaluable look into Kentucky's agricultural history and provide a context to the sorts of conversations that occurred as he raised his sons, John Jr. and Wendell. There is no doubt that without the Berry Center's interest in the papers, they would have been permanently lost. When viewed as a whole, the works of John Sr., John Jr., and Wendell offer compelling insights into rural economies that support good farming and land use. These papers, accompanied by associated interviews, photographs, works of art, oral histories, and manuscripts, depict both the art and science of agrarian life. These historical pieces reflect a culture of good farming and land use that was prevalent throughout our state and is now nearly gone. All of those papers will be online and available to the public, and researchers visit our center now to study the papers. I heard my father say recently that his subject has been the history of the industrialization of agriculture and the possibility of changing the standards by which that history is judged. Our work at the Berry Center is to hold on to the information we need to judge that history. We won't do better if we depend on myths to inform our efforts. Myths like U.S. agriculture feeds the world and that the local food movement has changed the culture of farming. Farmers are offered two choices right now in American agriculture. They can be either small and entrepreneurial or large and industrial, with almost nothing in the middle. After some initial excitement about local production for local markets in the late 80s and early 90s, most farmers in my area have given up on an unpredictable market that they don't understand and they don't trust. Farmers need an organization in the middle to move product, consider parity pricing, protect them from overproduction, and take good husbandry into account. My grandfather said this about parity in a speech to Congress in 1948. The parity concept is the happiest and most fortunate thought that has visited the minds of statesmen of this country in generations. It accords with our way of life and gives real and tangible meaning to the philosophy of equal opportunity. It is a consistent American way of striving for and approaching parity of income without the use of direct subsidy payments by the government. It must be preserved and effectuated to the end that farmers may continue to enjoy the high standard of living and opportunity which they have had only a taste of. I think that's very beautiful. He also said in a letter to Roland Evans and Robert Novak, dated September 16, 1981, determined assaults are being made on the production control and price support programs for tobacco, and no one raises an objection to the 8-hour day and the 40-hour week and the minimum wage, which is a supply control and a minimum price support. The reason, of course, is that labor has the vote and tobacco does not. To obtain the best work in the economies of land use, those who use the land must be enabled to afford the time and patience necessary to do the best work. And so parity of necessary occupations must be supported by parity of income. Parity in this sense is not a new thought. The Agricultural Adjustment Act defines parity as that gross income from agriculture which will provide the farm operator and his family with a standard of living equivalent to those afforded persons dependent upon other gainful occupations. Maybe the idea of parity does not need much explanation or defense, but I keep running into people who have no idea what the word means. If, as now and always, a sufficient staff of land users is necessary to the health of the land and therefore to the lives of all of us, then they should be afforded a decent livelihood. And this, the so-called free market cannot provide except by accident. The concept of parity, as fair-minded as it is necessary, addresses one of the problems of farming and farmers in the industrial economy. Another such problem, more fundamental and more in need of understanding, is that of overproduction. Other gainful employment in the cities escapes this problem because the large industrial corporations have not characteristically overproduced. Surplus production is a risk native to commercial agriculture. This is because farmers individually and collectively do not know and cannot learn ahead of time the extent either of public need or of market demand. Given the right weather and the progressive application of technologies, their failure to control production, even in their own interest, is almost certain. Either because the market is good and they are encouraged, or the market is bad and they are desperate. In the absence of imposed limits, overproduction will fairly predictably occur in agriculture as long as farmers and the land remain productive. It has only to be allowed by a political indifference prescribed by the evangels of the free market. For the corporate purchasers, the low price attendant upon overproduction is the greatest benefit. As for farmers, it is the singular cruelty of the current agricultural economy. Farm subsidies without production controls further encourage overproduction. In times of high costs and low prices, such subsidies are paid ultimately and quickly to the corporations. The problem of overproduction is everywhere in agriculture. We have too much organic milk right now, organic milk. A young farmer who sells produce at the Ferry Building in San Francisco told me that when his organic Brussels sprouts are ready for market, everyone else's are too, and he has trouble selling out. My husband had a waiting list of 100 people the entire time he ran his CSA. Now young farmers in Kentucky are having trouble selling enough shares to make a living. They are in direct competition with farm markets and cheap organic food in Walmart and Kroger. What is left of a generational farm culture is cut off from the information it needs the most. Industrial agriculture, taking most of its information from the Farm Bureau, Extension, and agri-industrial corporations, is not helping farmers to free themselves from the people who could not care less what happens to them or their communities. The local food movement, coming mostly from urban places, doesn't know much or anything about farming and the lives of farmers. It appears now that we can measure the success of the local food movement by how many people think that the situation for farmers is improving, when in fact it is not. Neither side of agriculture is working for farmers. Fewer than 1% of us are farming, and of that 1%, even fewer are farming in anything like approaching sustainable in a sustainable way. I spoke earlier of a couple of myths. One of the most ruinous is the official doctrine that there are too many farmers. This has never been revoked. This has been in place since the 50s. It was, in fact, this realization that set my father off, as he says, to write The Unsettling of America. In 1967, it was reported in the Louisville Courier-Journal that President Johnson's Special Commission on Federal Food and Fiber Policies said that the country's biggest farm problem was a surplus of farmers. It was clear to my father then, and it is clear to me now, that the lives and communities of small farmers, then still on the farm, were of less value than technological advances in agriculture. As evidence of the persistence of this doctrine, I want to share with you a passage from a letter of October 3rd, 2016, that John Logan Brent, Judge Executive of Henry County, wrote to my father and to me. I have taken a couple of afternoons to work on the accounting for farming cattle under the current terms. Enclosed, you will find that product based on a real example, which is our 100-acre farm, and its approximately 25 cow herd, which, by the way, is the average cow herd size in Kentucky. The good news is that for a young person wishing to earn a middle to slightly below middle class annual salary of $45,000, farming cattle full-time, he or she only has to have $3,281,000 in capital to get started. If he or she can find 780 acres to rent, he only has to have $551,000 for cows and equipment. I say this is the good news because the reality is that this was based on weaned calf price of $850 from June of this year. According to today's sales reports, that same calf is now $650 or less, and it's been up and down ever since John Logan wrote this. That alone is a prescription for how to get rid of farmers forgetting other adverse agricultural markets. Once and for a while, farmers were out of this boom and bust industrial agriculture because of the Burley Tobacco Growers Cooperative Association. Under this program, support prices for the various grades of tobacco were set according to a formula for assuring a fair return on the cost of production. Production was controlled by allotting to each farm according to its history of production, at first an acreage and later a poundage, that would be eligible for price supports under the program. The allotments each year were determined by the supply of tobacco worldwide that was available for manufacture. To buy a protected crop or a portion thereof, a purchaser had to bid a penny a pound above the support price. The government's assistance to the program consisted of a loan made annually against the crop, which permitted the program to purchase, store, and resell the portion of any year's crop that did not earn the extra penny a pound, which, thanks to the loan, would be purchased by the association and the grower paid at the warehouse. The cost to the government was only administrative until, in response to protests, this cost was charged to the farmers, and the program then operated on a basis of no net cost. The parity pricing under the tobacco program was in no sense a subsidy. In the 6 decades of its life, the program kept farmers on their farms in Kentucky, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, and West Virginia. It allowed for a very good diversified farm culture and kept soil in place because a living could be made plowing only the least erodible land. For instance, when I bought a 198-acre farm in 1982, the farm had a 5-acre tobacco base. Except for a few acres of grain crops that we raised to feed our dairy cows, the rest of the farm was used for permanent pasture and forage crops. The program was, in fact, an economy that we could function in. When we went to the bank to get a loan to buy the farm, the most important piece of information needed was the size of the tobacco base on the farm. That allowed the loan officer to see quickly that we could make our payments. The program allowed for farmers to move from tenancy to land ownership. This was a defining event in the lives of a considerable number of worthy people my husband and I knew, including his parents and grandparents. As I said, we can't replicate this program now. The political climate is not friendly to the idea that the free market needs to be restrained for the good of farmers, and we don't have a population of people who know how to farm. But this program and its principles provide a model of how to think about the economic lives of farmers. It cannot be forgotten because of the stigma of tobacco, which I believe is what has happened. We are in desperate need of models that work, and this is a good one. In fact, Organic Valley, the dairy cooperative, is modeled on the tobacco program. If we agree that food is a cultural product, then we have to think about what has happened to the rural culture. The demand for well-raised local products going up has met the rural culture coming down. There are fewer and fewer of us who can recognize what is happening. It seems to me that our work is to get hold of what is left of the old culture of thrift, husbandry, and neighborliness, and to strengthen it, to put an economy around good farming that values it. There are still young people who want to farm, who are inheritors of the old ways, and who are called to farm. Our work must relate specifically to a particular farmer on a particular farm. What will work well for him or her, for this farm, for this community? To help with this work, I've been in need of teachers and a vision of what I believe we are after. I've been lucky in both. The agriculture of Henry County, Kentucky declined a good deal in the years between my father's childhood and my own, but it was still pretty good when I was growing up. The farms in the little towns still looked well tended. People's pride was in their homes, and it showed. When I started farming in 1981, a farmer who was raised near our farm showed up to help every day when we were harvesting our first crop of tobacco. I had to get a good deal older than I was then to realize what he was doing. He was offering himself to us to save us from mistakes that, with his help, we wouldn't have to make. That is the culture we need again, and what the young people who want to farm now must do without. How can we be more helpful to them? I recently read a little haiku that goes, "Even in Kyoto, I'm nostalgic for Kyoto." One of the things we can do is bear witness to what was. Some of us have the good fortune to have seen a glimpse of a better, not to be heard as perfect, time. This informs our way forward. Like that farmer that helped some young people in a tobacco field some 35 years ago, we can help them and each other avoid some of the mistakes of the past. Can we be open and helpful to each other by freely sharing what we've figured out that works, what doesn't work? And to my mind, most importantly, can we be satisfied to do the work that our places require of us without making the same mistake as industrial agriculture by looking for big, one-size-fits-all solutions? I have spoken a couple of times about what I believe to be the weaknesses of the local food movement, and now I want to talk about the hope it gives me. More and more people are concerned about the food they eat and about the farmers that raise it. This is a great opportunity for that interest to deepen into curiosity and then knowledge about what it will take to reconnect rural and urban places. The local food movement must move beyond entrepreneurial farming if it is to become truly sustainable and if it is to build land-conserving communities. When my father published The Unsettling of America in 1977, right, he says that he had 4 allies, and now look, he says, there are people all over the world deeply concerned about industrial agriculture. Thank you for having me here this evening, and thank you on behalf of myself and my family and my community for all that you do. Thanks.